Welcome to this explainer. For years, the narrative around cannabis has been pretty consistent, right? It's just a plant, mostly harmless, completely detached from the severe cardiovascular risks we associate with things like tobacco. Well, as the medical data actually piles up, we are seeing a very different, honestly much more alarming picture. Today, we're diving deep into the hard science of cannabis-induced coronary spasms, and we're going to do it through the lens of a real patient's journey, a story of survival, deep research, and some incredibly fierce patient advocacy. So let's just jump right in.
The patient we're talking about is Steve Collins. He's 53, he suffered a massive cardiac event. And he really hit the nail on the head with this quote: "I expect my care team to work directly with the specific data of my case rather than generic protocols." I mean, what's so powerful about Steve's story is that he didn't just accept a standard cookie-cutter medical pathway after his heart attack. He actually dove into the scientific literature to figure out exactly why his heart failed him, and he built an ironclad case to educate his own doctors. The whole point of this explainer is to empower you with that exact same knowledge.
Which brings us to Section A Surprising Heart Attack. Let's take a look at Steve's story, starting with the actual event itself. Okay, so let's ground this right in undeniable reality. This is Steve's actual cardiology discharge summary. On June 24, 2026, Steve, who is a chronic, heavy cannabis user, was rushed to the ER with sudden, crushing chest pain. He was having a STEMI. That's a massive, life-threatening type of heart attack. Just look at the data on his chart here. His troponin levels, which is what they use to measure heart muscle damage, were at 529 nanograms per liter. To put that into perspective, the normal range is under 34, so his heart was literally starving for oxygen. But here is the crazy catch. When they looked at his arteries, he only had mild plaque disease. His arteries were not clogged up with decades of progressive cholesterol buildup. So what actually caused the heart attack? The diagnosis was a coronary spasm. His arteries just aggressively clamped down.
And looking at the timeline of this acute event brilliantly shows how a spasm like this actually unfolds. Because it's not just a random lightning strike, It's a perfect storm. It starts with years of chronic high-volume cannabis consumption. Then we zoom into the days just prior to the event. Steve was going through severe sleep deprivation, which spikes your systemic vascular resistance and creates a really pro-inflammatory state in the body. Then, hours before, acute sympathetic nervous system activation kicks in. And finally, minutes before he's admitted, sudden onset of crushing chest pain. The sleep deprivation essentially loaded the gun, but the cannabis pulled the trigger.
Let's move to section the science of vasospasms. We really need to understand the exact biological cascade happening inside the body when that trigger gets pulled.
So this biological cascade is absolutely crucial to understand. It's almost like a row of dominoes falling. Step 1. THC enters the system and directly activates CB1 receptors right on the smooth muscle cells of your blood vessels. Step 2. This triggers sympathetic overdrive. Your body gets flooded with catecholamines, which is basically a massive adrenaline dump causing tachycardia or a super fast heart rate. Step 3 is endothelial toxicity. Inhaling combusted matter actually damages the linings of your blood vessels, destroying the exact molecules your arteries desperately need to relax. And finally, step 4. Without the ability to relax and getting aggressively stimulated by THC and adrenaline, the smooth muscle violently constricts. Your artery literally pinches itself shut. And if you want physical proof, here it is. Look at the arrows pointing to those massive spikes on this ECG. Those are ST segment elevations. That is the exact electrical signature of a heart muscle screaming for oxygen because a cannabis-induced spasm has totally clamped down its blood supply. This isn't just theoretical biology, guys. This is a highly acute, dangerous cardiac emergency happening in real time.
All right, section, dropping the confirmation bias. Because honestly, it's about time we start listening to the new science. As a society, and especially for current cannabis users, we have got to drop the confirmation bias here.
I want this number to really make everyone pause for a second. 5-fold. According to peer-reviewed data published in the prestigious journal Circulation, the risk of triggering an acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack, increases 5-fold in the very first hour after smoking marijuana. 5 times the risk. No way around that stat.
And here is exactly why that 5-fold risk exists. These are the hidden cardiac dangers. First, cannabis consumption actively drives clot formation through your body's inflammatory pathways. On top of that, the carbon monoxide you inhale literally robs your red blood cells of oxygen. At the exact same time, because of that adrenaline dump, your heart rate is elevated, which actually decreases the time your heart has to fill up with blood between beats. And finally, It increases platelet aggregation, which is just a fancy way of saying it makes your blood stickier. So think about it. It's a massive mismatch. Your heart is working way harder, demanding more oxygen, while simultaneously receiving less oxygen through constricting, sticky, clot-prone arteries.
Which brings us to section Rethinking Standard Heart Protocols. Because understanding this unique mechanism leads to a massive medical paradigm shift. You have to target the root cause for patients like Steve.
This perfectly illustrates the massive problem Steve ran into during his recovery. Look at a traditional STEMI on the left. That's caused by progressive lifestyle plaque buildup over decades. So the standard protocol, lifelong high-intensity statins and blood thinners. But Steve's event, over on the right, was a vasospastic angina. It was a trigger-induced acute smooth muscle constriction. Treating Steve with maximum doses of generic lipid-lowering drugs entirely misses the root cause. The real treatment here is eliminating the trigger, which is cannabis, and strictly tracking systemic inflammation.
And yet, this is the general practitioner information sheet Steve was handed. Just standard dual antiplatelet therapy, indefinite aspirin, high-dose statins, ACE inhibitors. Now, don't get me wrong, these are miraculous drugs for a standard plaque rupture heart attack, but for an isolated spasm event caused by a chemical trigger, Steve realized that accepting this generic protocol meant a lifetime of heavy medications he might not actually need, while completely ignoring the specific data of his own body.
So, section, Educating your care providers. What do you do when standard protocols just don't fit? Well, you have to start speaking their language.
This right here is the exact table Steve built for his clinical consultation advocacy brief. Because if you were saying to yourself, I'm the patient, and I want to educate my GP, my cardiologist, you can't just walk in with some internet articles. You have to speak their language. Look at the authorities he cited. The European Society of Cardiology explicitly isolating cannabis as a direct driver of vasospasms via CB1 receptors. The British Heart Foundation warning of highly elevated immediate MI risks. Peer-reviewed meta-analyses in the journal Heart. European Heart Journal case reports showing cannabis triggering over 90% severe artery constriction.
This framework is absolutely ironclad. By using the exact same databases and medical authorities that doctors rely on every single day, Steve was able to advocate for a totally personalized care plan. If you or someone you know has suffered a similar event, this right here is the blueprint. Print this copy out and bring it straight to your appointment. You have to demand that your care team looks at the specific etiology, the specific cause of your event, so you can make sure your healthcare providers are up to date with the current information.
Let's wrap up with section Recovery and Informed Choice. Because once you've successfully advocated for that custom plan, what do your recovery expectations and management strategies actually look like moving forward?
Here is Steve's data-driven recovery plan. First and absolutely foremost, 100% total cessation of all cannabis delivery routes. Smoking, vaping, edibles, it all has to go for sure. You have to stop those active metabolites from hitting your CB1 receptors. Second, objective biomarker tracking. Instead of just guessing, Steve requested his doctors track his high-sensitivity C-reactive protein, or hsCRP. That measures the actual inflammation happening in his blood vessels. By monitoring these real-time metrics, plus his fasting lipids, Steve and his doctors can safely and collaboratively taper down those heavy standard medications as his clinical benchmarks improve. It is entirely about root cause resolution rather than just slapping a generic Band-Aid on the problem.
You know, Steve's story is a massive wake-up call. It forces us to confront some really uncomfortable truths about substances we've been told are mostly harmless. And it challenges us to take active, aggressive ownership of our medical care. We've looked at the biology, the ECGs, and the hard data from top cardiological institutes. The connection between cannabis and acute coronary spasms is very real, and it is potentially deadly. We really want to make every cannabis user think about what happened to Steve. So I'll leave you with this. Now that you know the true science of vasospasms, what informed choices will you make for your heart?